A lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. It's been an eventful weekend in Russia as Vladimir Putin's mercenary army staged a coup before collapsing just 150 miles from Moscow. Does this spell the beginning of the end for Vladimir the Terrible? A return of the green levy is on the table. This tax hits the worst off the hardest, making us cold and poor. The government is apparently returning the cost to consumers after I removed them last year as Energy Secretary. The levy ought to be abolished. When I heard that a group of musicians and politicians had written to the government to allow drug testing at festivals, I thought it was to stop crime being committed. Instead, they want quality control for criminal activities. And it's been a productive weekend for the Prince of Wales as he unveils plans to tackle homelessness, but less so for the Duke of Sussex, who has supposedly been branded unproductive by Spotify and Netflix executives. State of the Nation starts now. We'll also be joined by a brilliant panel this evening. The cantankerous historian Dr. David Starkey, who will be challenged by the still small voice of calm, the author and broadcaster, Amy Nicole. As ever, I want to hear from you. As you know, it's the most important part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now, it's time for the news that you've all been waiting for with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you. Good evening. The top story tonight on GB News is that the head of the Wagner mercenary group that launched an attempted military coup in Russia at the weekend today says he didn't want to overthrow Putin. Speaking for the first time since the group's march to Moscow, Yevgeny Prigozhin said today the progress of his troops highlighted serious security problems in the country. Well, in an audio message today released on his Telegram account, Prigozhin added that his troops turned around to avoid spilling the blood of Russian soldiers. President Putin didn't mention the mutiny in a video address released today. Well, here, the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, said the rebellion has shown the world that Russia is not as strong as previously thought.
Prigozhin's rebellion is an unprecedented challenge to President Putin's authority, and it is clear that cracks are emerging in the Russian support for the war. I, of course, hold no candle for Prigozhin or his forces. They have committed atrocities in Ukraine and elsewhere, but he has said out loud what we have believed since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion, that this invasion was both unjustified and unprovoked.
Well, in the United States, President Joe Biden said the Western allies would continue to work together to assess the situation.
The ultimate outcome of all this remains to be seen. But no matter what comes next, I will keep making sure that our allies and our partners are closely aligned in how we are reading and responding to the situation. It's important we stay.
Well, within the last hour, Russia says it scrambled fighter jets to intercept 3, what it says are British military aircraft heading towards the Russian border. The Russian Defence Ministry claims an RC-135 reconnaissance and electronic warfare plane and 2 Typhoon fighter jets were heading over the Black Sea. The ministry says the aircraft then turned back. Well, in news away from Russia, it costs nearly £170,000 to send a migrant to Rwanda. That's according to figures from the Home Office. The government says nearly 37% of people would need to be deterred from crossing the English Channel in small boats for the illegal migration bill to break even. Their assessment also warns that if current trends continue without reducing hotel usage, the asylum system could cost £32 million a day by the end of 2026. And lastly, the Prince of Wales today launched an initiative aimed at ending homelessness. Prince William's 5-year project called Homewards aims to make rough sleeping a thing of the past. Initially focusing on 6 locations, local businesses will be asked to develop action plans with up to £500,000 in funding available. Those are your latest news headlines. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Winston Churchill once said of Russia that it was a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma. And this weekend's events merely affirm this statement. Well, here's the riddle. When is a coup not a coup? Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine over a year ago, expecting to rule from Donetsk to the Carpathian Mountains and to be cheered by the people. But what he found instead was a defiant Ukrainian population whose national identity is now stronger and more united than ever. It put up an immense resistance to the holder of the world's largest nuclear arsenal. Putin had forgotten that Fabergé eggs do not hatch. And with Britain leading the way, Western nations came together to support Ukraine financially and militarily in its pursuit of territorial integrity and self-determination. Since the invasion, tens of thousands of Russian soldiers have lost their lives, and it is clearly taking its toll. And now, matters are worse for the Russian president. On Friday evening, the Wagner mercenary group, led by Yevgeny Prigozhin, invaded Russia. A column of armoured vehicles left Ukraine and entered Russia before arriving in Rostov-on-Don, a city of more than 1 million people. Prigozhin vowed to lead his unit to Moscow if his demands weren't met. And so they went in an exhilarating 24-hour period, getting as close to the capital as nearly 150 miles. To put this in context, this is similar to the distance between London and Taunton. It led to the Russian forces setting up barricades outside Moscow. But dramatically, Prigozhin reversed course, ordering his men back to their camps in Ukraine. He himself fled into exile in Belarus. For the first time since 1942 at the Battle of Moscow, the Russian capital faced urban warfare, except this time from a creation of its own mercenary army. This weekend surely is a pivotal point in the conflict. The mercenaries were welcomed in Rostov unchallenged. People took selfies with them and their tanks. It exposed the weakness of the Russian state and perhaps we hope marks the beginning of the end. It is certainly the greatest threat to Putin's leadership in his 23-year reign. It was famously said that the Russian constitution is absolutism tempered by assassination, and this was clearly an attempt to get rid of Putin. He has survived today, but is he finding the writing is on the Kremlin wall? As always, I want to know what you think. Email me at mailmog@GBNews. But I'm so pleased to be joined now by Owen Matthews, the author of Overreach, the inside story of Putin's war in Ukraine, because we want to try and understand what's going on. Owen, there are so many different stories and rumours flying about. What, as you understand it, really happened? Why did it end as it did? And what happens next?
Well, hello, Jacob. It's so nice to see you. It's been a long time. Firstly, that was a really excellent summary of the events, except for one very important thing. You said it was clearly an attempt to get rid of Putin. Actually, I think that's mistaken. What we're looking at is a mutiny, a military mutiny, by a mercenary commander whose main agenda was saving himself. And if you ask what happened, Prigozhin was put in a situation where his Wagner group was disbanded officially, that the Kremlin clearly wanted him and his men dead, or at least the Ministry of Defense did, because at least by Prigozhin's account, they began shelling them, and that was the proximate cause for the rebellion. And their agenda was not really a political agenda, except they wanted, in Prigozhin's words, to march for justice and have a more efficient way of prosecuting the war. He did not personally attack Putin. What he wanted was to survive, and he really had to rebel or die. So that's really an important difference. It's a mutiny, not a coup against Putin.
But isn't the effect of the mutiny to weaken Putin, or is Putin as strong now as he was 48 hours ago?
No, well, he's certainly not as strong as he was 48 hours ago, and he's been desperately undermined because from the very beginning of his power, his unique selling point, his entire stance has been as a tough guy, as a guarantor of Russia's security. And very clearly, what we've seen in the disastrous events of Saturday and Sunday was not only did he begin by failing to protect the Russian people from an armed insurgency, but furthermore caved into the demands of those insurgents. So you really have a desperate situation where you have a leader who's the core of whose pact with his electorate or with his people has been as a guarantor of their security, failing utterly in his most basic tasks. So he has been humiliated utterly. On the other hand, he survived.
Should we read anything into Prigozhin being welcomed, as far as one can tell, as his forces moved and not facing any opposition? Or did the population not necessarily really know what was going on until they heard about it later?
Well, Jacob, you're absolutely right to focus in on that, because those were the most extraordinary scenes, among the most extraordinary scenes that I've seen in more than 25 years of covering Russia. What we saw was an armed insurgent, a rebel general, rolling up into one of the major capitals of southern Russia, a city of over 1 million, taking over a military headquarters with no resistance, and then being feted by the people. And crucially, these are people who have shown no interest in opposing Putin, in demonstrating against Putin, demonstrating against the war. But nonetheless, they saw that they came out on the streets, they shouted Wagner, Wagner, and then when police cars showed up to supervise the withdrawal of Wagner from Rostov, the police cars were pelted and shouted, and the crowd shouted, shame, shame. Now, those are the images that are going to be echoing in Putin's head tonight.
So does that indicate that there is greater opposition to Putin than people previously thought, and that the Russian population, which is always assumed to be willing to bear great hardships, and historically, of course, has borne great hardships, actually this time is getting fed up with what's going on in Ukraine, the losses are too great, and the mothers of Russia are finally beginning to think it's too much.
Был бы подавлен. Организаторы мятежа, несмотря на утерю адекватности, не могли этого не понимать. Все они понимали, в том числе то, что...
Okay. Well, we've just gone to a speech from Putin. I thought we'd been hacked momentarily by the Russians with a broadcast coming on. So we're going to get updates as that. But Owen, you're coming back now.
Okay. Sorry, I thought I had a sinister, familiar voice that was not yours. Prigozhin's revolt, his mutiny, was not an anti-war mutiny. It was a pro-war mutiny. The people who came out on the streets of Rostov shouted Wagner, Wagner, because they think that Wagner are the only Russian soldiers that have actually done a good job in the war. Don't confuse support for Wagner with opposition for Putin. It's opposition to Putin because from people who think that Putin has not done a thorough enough job in attacking Ukraine. That's really the sinister part of this, is that not only Prigozhin's popularity rests among military bloggers, among ultranationalists, among Orthodox Orthodox nationalists, lies in his critique of the war effort. They're not doing enough to defeat Ukraine. It's not an anti-war protest. It's not even particularly an anti-Putin protest.
That's very important. So what does this mean, do you think, for Ukraine in terms of the war that is going on there and how it will be pursued? If Wagner was the most effective part of the war effort, with Wagner being disbanded, does that weaken the Russian effort? Is that good for Ukraine? Or with the popularity of Wagner, does that mean that the war effort gets stronger and worse for Ukraine?
It remains to be seen whether Wagner will return to the front lines. If Wagner does return to the front lines, then that's an extraordinary climb down for Putin. I think ultimately the bottom line is that this whole episode is extremely positive for Ukraine, obviously, because it shows that Putin's regime is fragile, that the security of Russia is actually brittle, and that his authority has been damaged. However, it's also somewhat scary and sinister news for Ukraine because the support shown for Prigozhin shows not only the weakness of Putin, but the strength of pro-war feeling of Russians who believe that the war is not being prosecuted with enough vigor and determination.
Well, this is breaking news that Putin has just said the organisers of the rebellion will be brought to justice. How does that square with Prigozhin going to Belarus? And does it mean the whole of the Wagner forces will be facing prosecution?
That's very interesting. He has just gone back on his word. Although, admittedly, we only have Prigozhin's account of the events that he claims that Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko personally guaranteed his safety and security. He's been supposedly spotted, according to social media, in a hotel in Minsk. If Putin tries to go back on his word and prosecutes Wagner, then he has another fight on his hands. That's actually a terribly dangerous thing for him to do. The problem is, for Putin, he's damned if he disbands Wagner. He's actually in terrible trouble if he tries to take them on militarily. He finds himself at the mercy of events. And this is really the bottom line of this whole situation, is that he is weakened because his room for maneuver and his credibility have been fatally undermined. As you've just reported, he is now attempting to go back, sort of row back on his weakness that he showed in capitulating to Wagner. But actually, one of the things the reasons why people are supporting, why people trust Prigozhin, is that he's famously straight-talking, keeps his word.
Well, Putin has now said that decisions to neutralize the threat were taken, which sounds quite sinister. And sounds as if he's completely going back on what was said yesterday, as far as we understand it. And from what you're saying, is quite a high-risk strategy if he's taking on the Wagner group, which is popular in Russia and has been the most aggressive of the Russian troops.
And one thing we all know from even cursory readings of Russian history is that revolutions and uprisings are made by small minorities of very determined people. On paper, Putin commands about 4.5 million armed men, and they're mostly men, if you count the police, if you count the Federal Security Service, if you count the paramilitary police and so on. The vast majority of those people are not fighting in Ukraine. They are on the streets and in the cities of Russia, allegedly guaranteeing Russian security. Obviously, they're not doing a very good job, as we saw in Rostov. But the point is that on paper, Putin's 4.5 million win against Prigozhin's 25,000. The real question is, where do the cracks run? Is there a moment when the Russian military will disobey orders? And there are basically two paradoxical questions, and they, who would join Wagner and their suicidal death match with the Kremlin? Probably nobody. But conversely, who which Russian officer or soldier would lay down their lives to fight Prigozhin, to fight Wagner and their own people? There's no honor in that. So equally, nobody. So the Putin is actually forcing a test of the loyalty of his own troops, which they may not pass.
Well, thank you very much for that very insightful analysis, Owen. I'm very grateful for you joining me, and it does look as if Putin is in very serious trouble, which can only be good news. Coming up, will the ideological obsession with net zero make you £170 a year worse off? And don't forget, it's the Battle of the Princes. The last time two princes fought, Henry defeated Richard. But this time is William defeating Henry.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Jason says, nothing changed in this war, but I don't think Russia is that strong. Natek says, they got threatened with a sinister attack on them. That's why they retreated. And John says, please be careful quoting Mr. Churchill, as though as wokes at St. Paul may consider it yet more evidence of his racism and start wetting their nappies. All the more reason to quote Churchill, I think, to wind up those very, very silly people. Anyway, back in the autumn of last year, when Liz Truss became Prime Minister, a key point of focus was tackling the energy crisis and making utilities cheaper for the public. That's why we lifted the moratorium on fracking to increase energy supply, to drive the price down, and implemented the energy price guarantee, which removed the green levy. As the current Prime Minister took office, he reversed the fracking moratorium, or put it back again, as well as several other pro-growth policies. He did, however, have the goodness to maintain the absence of the green levy, apparently up until now. Over the weekend, it's been reported that the green levy is set to return, which will add about £170 per year to the average energy bill. The Treasury is so embarrassed about this, it won't even answer questions. When we implemented the energy price guarantee, it was designed to cover the green levy, but now that guarantee is due to expire and Ofcom's price cap is lowering, so it seems the levy will be no longer covered. Now, I'm joined by Sam Hall, the director of the Conservative Environment Network. Sam, if we're going to make getting to net zero popular, we can't do it by piling charges onto the British people, can we?
Thanks very much for having me on the show, Jacob. Firstly, I'd just like to give a bit of context for what the green levies actually fund, because I think there are some really important benefits that they have unlocked for us. So, of course, they help us tackle emissions by funding renewable energy projects and insulation projects. They also help tackle fuel poverty by giving out grants to fuel poor households to let them invest in insulation and build discounts. And they make us less reliant on energy imports as well. They've enabled us to scale up these homegrown sources of clean energy, making us less reliant on imports from Russia and so on. So I think the things that they've funded have been very valuable. Now, as you said in your introduction, I think there is a question now, as the energy price guarantee expires, as to how we fund the costs of these important schemes in the future. And I would agree that I think there is a strong case, given the continuing high price of energy, to look at funding them out of general taxes rather than putting them back on bills. But I appreciate the Chancellor has a very tight fiscal headroom at the moment, and so that might not be possible.
But we'd have brought down prices more if we'd gone ahead with fracking, which would have provided secure domestic energy, not dependent on Russia, not dependent on LNG coming on, more environmentally friendly than LNG imports. Shouldn't we be doing that to keep the price of energy low so that people don't have to be cold and poor?
Well, I agree that we should be doing what we can to increase the supply of energy and take that supply side approach to bringing down bills. The last government, the Liz Truss government, obviously tried very hard to bring back fracking, and it met with a lot of political resistance. So, I'd query whether that is politically deliverable. I think the other thing we should be doing, though, is building much more wind, solar, nuclear, all the other sources of energy which we know are available. Wind and solar are the cheapest new sources of electricity generation. The prices have fallen significantly thanks to the Conservative government introduced contracts for difference scheme, which has encouraged fierce competition between renewable generators and helped to de-risk private finance to come in and build those projects. So I think we need to get building on all these sources of energy, and we need faster planning decisions and more grid infrastructure as well to help those projects come online sooner.
Well, thank you very much, Sam. Thank you for joining me, and I agree with you. We always need faster planning decisions. David, £170 a year falls on some of the poorest people in the country. Can this possibly be a sensible thing for the government to restore?
It depends what your value is. So this is the issue of value. If your value is the pursuit of net zero, I'm afraid people will just have to swallow it. It's as simple as that. If we set this as an ideal target, there is no way in which fuel prices can actually be reduced. It's as simple as that.
So, Amy, is it a price worth paying?
Well, I put some figures because I think this makes it really easy to understand. In 2022, 3.2 million people fell into fuel poverty, couldn't afford to pay their bills, while Shell made £61,000 a minute. Can I say that again? £61,000 a minute. When you open your bill, when your viewers open your bill, the bill isn't high because of a green tax. It's high because of corporate greed.
But it's all rubbish. This is silly.
Well, what justifies Shell making £61,000 a minute?
Well, how do you actually... Right, can we just begin to understand fundamentals? Oil exploration is monstrously expensive.
This isn't profit after that.
Yes, but bear in mind, in 2020...
Can we gently explain?
Because in 2020, the price of crude oil in the height of COVID...
The wholesale price?
The price of crude oil, the market price, went below zero. So the oil companies, on every barrel of oil they extracted, actually lost money.
So they're in debt?
They had to pay people. Then the oil price bounced back and the gas price bounced back, and they made profits that recovered this. It's a very cyclical business.
Jacob,
but we wouldn't have any. We wouldn't have any.
Unjustifiable.
We wouldn't have any oil and gas if we didn't allow people to make profits,
Well,
and then we'd have no energy.
Oh no, I would allow profits, of course, but even just a 25% windfall tax.
This is
Why always pass it on to the consumer?
Well, this is £170 per bill passed by the government to the consumer.
That's a drop in the ocean.
No, it's not.
The real drop, right. Can we just get the real drop in the ocean? The reason that prices are so high is something completely... electricity prices are so high is nothing to do, actually, with directly Shell. It is simply because electricity is priced by what is called net marginal cost. That is the most expensive single unit of generation, governs the price to everybody. This, again, you see, you should be asking, why do we have structurally, probably now, I think, the most expensive electricity?
In Europe.
Well, the figures vary virtually from day to day, but we are right up there with Denmark and Germany. And with Germany. And if you actually look at America, you look at France, you look at China, their energy costs are a third of ours. Now, this is the result of government decision. This is a deliberate decision to favour renewables.
So, Amy, can I come to David's first point?
Mm-hmm.
Because this is a perfectly reasonable view that some people hold. Is it worth paying these prices to get to net zero?
Of course. Since 2001, when these green levies came in, they have done infinite good. For example, with the programmes of home insulation, which has taken 4 million homes and restricted their ability to even fall into the category that they could suffer fuel poverty because it saved them money on their bills. The green tax is a long-term solution. It's not short-term.
So what is a solution? So what is it a solution to? See, this is the problem. Green energy will always be much more expensive.
It's just simply not.
Green energy will always be more expensive because we have no means of storing it. This means you need double the actual power generation capacity. You build enormous redundancy into it, and there is no way you can get around that.
Or do you need more research into how better to store it?
But we're not there
In other
yet.
words, this is pie in the sky.
So you just
there will be a wonderful, perfect future. And the problem is, of course, we produce less than 1% of the world's emissions. We are committing economic suicide because silly, naive people like you...
Hold on.
It's
true. Mere abuse won't get anywhere.
I draw issue of being called a silly, naive person.
Let's ignore that. Let's strike that from the record.
Because the evidence is there. This isn't a new tax. This tax has been in since 2001.
I thought we'd both admitted, you yourself said, that the levy is a tiny figure. What I'm trying to do is to explain and to get Jacob to understand too, which I think he does, why overall energy prices are lunatically high in the United Kingdom. And the history of all... Just one second, this really matters. Why I'm getting irritated with you. The entire history of human progress since the Industrial Revolution depends on cheap energy. We are inflicting a complete reversal of the means of progress. And this notion that there is a green nirvana is not true.
David, I don't want to irritate you. I never want to irritate you, but I do want you to be aware that renewables are the future, and this is a hill that I'm happy to die on. We're going to run out of fossil fuels. He wishes
May I offer you a Calvary?
That was a short-sharp relationship we had.
May I offer you a Calvary? I would be very happy.
So do you think we're just going to have fossil fuels and we're just going to rely on that?
I think that we will rely on
energy security, no new green jobs.
Sorry, there would be plenty of energy security if we exploited, like fracking, if we exploited the North Sea.
Fracking has about 6 months of energy under our feet.
No, it doesn't.
Well, how come most of the scientists who
So
look
we've
at
got
fracking...
decades of
not
fracking.
Decades. 10 decades isn't enough. What's going to continue on forever and ever and ever? Renewables. Renewables are the future. It's an opportunity for another industrial revolution.
We're going to allow Amy to have the last word on that, but thank you very much to my brilliant panel. And David certainly lived up to his billing as cantankerous this evening. Coming up, we're post-Glastonbury, and MPs and music stars have been campaigning to bring back drug testing in festivals, not to catch criminals, but to help them. Is this the world turned upside down? Plus, Richard of York gave battle in vain. Will Harry of Sussex also give battle in vain?
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Elizabeth says, it's tragic the Truss government was toppled on a Bank of England and Treasury lie. Just think how many more supply-side reforms you might have made. And Carter says this government has pressed the self-destruct button and seems determined not to get re-elected. What madness. To paraphrase George Orwell, one sometimes gets the impression that the mere word drugs and legalisation draw towards them with magnetic force every fruit juice drinker, nudist, sandal wearer, sex maniac, Quaker, nature cure quack, pacifist and feminist in England. It's festival season, the sun is out, the guitars are blaring and live music lovers are out in force. They're welcome to it. For some in our country, festivals are almost as popular as test matches. Dancing, partying with friends, singing along with their favourite stars. Not surprisingly, to enjoy all of this, many people need to take mood-enhancing drugs. These are very dangerous, and the consumption of unregulated substances sometimes leads to tragic deaths. Now, a group of musicians and MPs have penned an open letter to the government urging it to allow quality control testing. But why, when such substances are illegal, are we allowing testing for any other response than criminal proceedings? Surely such a measure, rather than improving safety, just normalises and even encourages illegal drug consumption. Either we should enforce the law or we should repeal it, but the government should not be complicit in breaking the law. I'm joined now to debate this with a fruit juice drinker, the Director of Research at the Adam Smith interview, Mr. Maxwell Marlowe. Maxwell, I'm sorry to accuse you of being a fruit juice drinker, but isn't the key point here not whether you're in favour of legalisation of drugs or not, but currently our law says it is illegal, and the government should not be complicit in allowing people to break the law?
Well, Jacob, you're a Conservative, and you look at the world as it is rather than as it should be. Now, yes, it is already illegal to take drugs, and people still do it anyway. It was the case in Prohibition back in the 20s with America. People got rid of alcohol, they got Al Capone. It's a completely different argument, I think, with drugs at festivals. What I think is important is stopping drug overdose deaths, of which have been going up continuously since about 2015. Now, when you look at the research and the data and the statistics around testing of drugs, you see that more people who have the drugs tested, around 74%, I should say, discard the drug if they find even a little bit of impurity in there. So actually, after testing, drug use goes down. And that is also the case, and as recommended by the DCMS Select Committee, not a year ago, that the Home Office should have a look at Section 7 of the Misuse of Drugs Act.
But surely what the government should be doing, if there are the resources to do this, is sending the police into these festivals and arresting people who are breaking the law and arresting the people who are supplying the drugs to these festivals. That is the law of the land. And once you say, well, we won't bother enforcing this law, what law do you enforce, or just become a free-for-all?
I don't think it's essentially legalising it, though. And the police are already present at these festivals, and there are sniffer dogs there to sniff out drugs. The thing is...
And are they arresting people? Are they going to prison?
I assume so, yes.
Well, they don't seem to be, do they? For cannabis, the police now give people a cannabis warning, whereas actually the law provides for a prison sentence.
Of course it does, but, I mean, I've just returned from Arizona, for example. I was there a couple of days ago. And what Arizona have done is they have legalised the use of marijuana. And what has happened? So we see drug-related crime down. Tax revenue for government going up by about $200 million last year.
But this is a perfectly respectable argument, but it's a different one. You're saying drugs should be legalised. Now, if you can win a majority of that, that's fine. But what I'm saying to you is that whilst the law of the land is the law of the land, it is fundamental to the rule of law that the law is enforced, and it thoroughly undermines the rule of law if the government actually is complicit in the law being broken and says, oh, it's fine if you break this law, because if law becomes a matter of choice, there may be other laws that I don't like, and then surely I'm free to break them too.
Well, it is a good point, but if we look at the drugs example specifically, it is Section 7 of the Misuse of Drugs Act, which says that this testing is allowed to take place. And we've known that this is an effective treatment for reducing deaths and reducing consumption. Now, who is in favour, essentially, of having the testing? It's the festivals. It's the...
Well, the festivals want drug dealers and drug addicts to break the law.
No, they don't.
Because that's what they enjoy at their festivals.
Not at all, not at all.
They are complicit with criminal activity.
I disagree.
They should be done with conspiracy to supply.
I completely disagree. A lot of festivals have a no-tolerance policy.
Well, they clearly don't, because they want to test the drugs so that people have safer drugs.
They don't want to test the drugs.
They want them tested? By drug dealers?
No, not by drug dealers, not at all.
Who's doing the testing then?
So there is a non-profit charity called In the Loop, which is run by a criminologist professor at the University of Liverpool. And when you look at what they do, they, take the drugs and they, do something called START.
So criminology is somebody who's known a lot about crime.
Well, they do.
And he's helping crime.
Well, she's
not
helping crime. She's not helping crime at all.
Well, she is, because she's helping people buy drugs that are illegal.
No,
she's not making them feel that they're safe.
No, not at all.
But drugs...
She's telling them when they're unsafe and then they are discarded.
But drugs aren't safe in principle. That if you think of the effects cannabis has had people, its link to mental health, the breakdowns in mental health you've had linked to cannabis, the addiction you get to other illegal substances. This idea that just because they've been tested, they're suddenly safe, isn't actually true. It creates a false sense of security.
I mean, no,
for people.
I agree with you. Drugs are dangerous. People shouldn't do them. Everyone knows that, but people do them anyway. And as I've said, Jacob, you look at the world as the way it is.
You're arguing a different case, which is a perfectly respectable one, for legalisation of drugs.
I'm not.
Whereas what I'm arguing for is for the majesty of the law. And that if you undermine the majesty of the law, you're actually opening up to anarchy, because which laws should we then abide by? I don't like paying council tax. Am I free not to do that?
It's completely different. I disagree.
No, it's not. Why don't I have somebody who says I don't have to pay?
Within the current legislation, it says that it is permissible to test the drugs at front of house, or they could do back of house testing. But
it's not permissible either to take them or to supply them. So the overriding law is that they are illegal.
You are allowed to. There's nothing illegal about actually being high. It is illegal.
Well, it's illegal to have them, possess them.
Yes, correct. Yes, but again, the word of the law. So coming back to the point about who is in favour of basically this, removal of safe testing, it is the festivals, it is the festival goers, it is the parents of people who've died of overdoses and bad drugs.
The festivals and the festival goers want to take illegal drugs, and we shouldn't be aiding and abetting them. We shouldn't aid and abet people in breaking the law.
Well, we're aiding and abetting them in stopping them from dying.
No, we're not. They won't die if they don't take drugs, and if we enforce the drugs laws, and the drugs aren't there.
Well, we could say the same about murder. Why not just enforce the murder laws?
Which is what we try to do.
We do try to do, and murder still happens.
And that's why we have very strict gun laws, we have very strict knife laws, and we have, in this country, relatively few murders compared to the United States and various other countries.
I agree, and there's a stabbing epidemic in London.
So let's try and enforce the law. Fiat justitia et ruant caeli. Thank you, Maxwell. It's not Bosworth Field, it's not even the jousting field, but two princes are fighting a PR battle. Who will win?
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything, I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not
believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point.
And action.
Sergeant, we're being greeted by superstar panel that are already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Jeff says, anyone found with drugs simply should be arrested. The law is simple, so use it. Colin says, Maxwell Marlowe looks like a young Jacob. I do disagree with him, though. I must confess I thought Maxwell was an excellent guest. I hope he'll come back on. Graham says, well said, Jacob. You're completely right. If it's against the law, it's illegal. A podcast, my dukedom for a podcast. We'll discuss the tale of two princes and their role in public life. In the city of the angels, those great arbiters of taste, Spotify and Netflix, have reportedly decided that His Royal Highness the Duke of Sussex lacks productivity, whilst our gallant Garter Knight, the Prince of Wales, is successfully jousting with the Republicans in his crusade to tackle homelessness. Does the elder brother win again? Well, for my Royal Roundup, I'm joined by my panel of historian, Dr. David Starkey, and author and broadcaster, Amy Nicol. Amy, do you think this, what the Prince William is doing, the Prince of Wales is doing, is actually really very important? It shows monarchy at its best. It's putting forward something that everybody wants to be solved. It's not party political, but he can use his convening power to improve the life chances of some of the least fortunate in society.
Yes, I can see there is some irony with the symbolisation, that's not a word, is it, David? The personification of inequality, talking about homelessness. However, I don't really like that argument. I've heard a lot of that coming out of some prominent speakers on the left today, because I think this is a good example of when monarchy can be useful, because they're using their soft power to point out something wrong in society, and maybe point and prod the government to hopefully take some action on it. And it's great PR as well, isn't it? Undeniably.
And it was shown during COVID that actually homeless could be dealt with, and it was absolutely remarkable how many people were helped and found shelter. And if the Prince of Wales can do that again, can repeat that, with relatively small amounts of money he's talking about, that would be a great advantage for society.
The government, why can they not see they solved homelessness during the pandemic? So why not put that into action again and repeat? Because between 2010 and 2017, homelessness went up by 160% during that time. And then during the pandemic, we worked out a way to work out of homelessness. So why is that not possible now?
There was, of course, a distinct element of semi-coercion. In other words, the removal of people from the street. And I think it's important that one looks at that. Once upon a time, homelessness did not exist because there were effectively laws against it and laws against begging, which were enforced. And these laws were deliberately relaxed in the name of freedom. So it's important to look at the broader picture. Of course you're right, Jacob, and of course you're right, Amy. This is a good thing. I think there were two ways of looking at it. One is in a very continuing royal tradition, which goes right back really to George III, of course, with whom his father identifies very strongly. If you go into the great hospitals of London, the greatest of them, of course, St. Bart's, you will see all inscriptions going around testifying to charity, to the work of charity. And traditionally, from that point onwards, the monarch has been head of charitable giving. The great problem with it, of course, is that an ambitious welfare state undercuts the role of charity, and confiscatory taxation reduces the means for it. So there's a certain tension. But what I think is, we mustn't forget the other prince. What I think is more interesting is the psychological point, that what you're seeing the two princes doing is representing the different faces of their mother. The younger prince, Harry, represents Diana's silliness, self-indulgence, bizarre relationship with the press. The older represents the best of Diana. I mean, he actually cited his memory of that first visit with his mother to a homeless shelter and sees it as his monument to his mother. So what I think we're seeing between the two boys is a kind of struggle for the memory of their mother.
That's such a strange interpretation, David, because...
On the contrary, it's self-evident.
It's quite harsh.
Because...
Why?
Because Prince Harry is arguably living out what his mother would have loved to have achieved.
Yes, I think that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. What I said. Listen to what I said. I said that each represents the other half of their mother.
David, you put it in quite a harsh way, saying it was the silliness of his mother.
Well, she was silly.
He is the second son. He doesn't have a career where he's going to be king.
He also has a foundation dedicated to charitable causes. The whole linchpin of Archwell is charitable causes.
Really, what a joke. And as though they could make any difference within America.
I think they've made massive differences in Afghanistan.
The Invictus Games is very serious.
There's a lot more to them than that. Meghan Markle, that's why she gets so many charity awards, because she helps women in developing countries in all sorts of ways. So their charity work isn't talked about because the press don't like to talk about that side of them, because they love to just focus on how shallow and rubbish they are.
I thought we were actually really supposed to be talking about Harry. Harry did, in fact, have a major charitable activity, which was here, but that was the old Harry with the Invictus Games. That was the Harry we all liked. That was the Harry fulfilling his role as a second son. The problem is, having gone off with Meghan, he's absorbed all kinds of weird, Californian Kool-Aid. You know, he is drunk at the well of Californian self-righteousness and absurdity.
You're just digesting the tabloid media narrative of Harry.
Sorry, I'm producing a very sense. Are you actually defending Harry and Meghan?
Well, we need somebody to defend. Come on, defend the Duke and Duchess of Sussex.
What is there not to defend when you look at it factually? They're very successful in the US.
They've just been sacked.
They have popularity ratings that I think most politicians could probably strive.
No, their popularity ratings in England are worse than the Conservative Party.
They're in 3-4.
No, sorry.
I mean, what you're saying is just almost as silly as what you said about energy. Really, and it is equally contradicted by basic facts.
Meghan Markle's just been signed to a new acting agency which represents Matt Damon. Her acting career is absolutely taking off. So factually, they're doing really well. They just made £78 million.
Yeah, £78 million.
Work.
David, you and I have not made £78 million.
No, we haven't, because
they've done pretty well.
We are reasonably honest. Can I remind you of the verdict, a word that I couldn't really repeat here, which says they were grifters, that they were cheats. They got the money.
Some very unpleasant man who works at Spotify.
They got their money by cheating, quite simply.
But how did they cheat?
They cheated because come on, Jacob. If you sign a contract and don't deliver, look at the tiny amount they've delivered for that vast amount of money.
The tiny amount. They rated the highest rated documentary in Netflix history.
For 5 seconds.
They delivered. You may not like the documentary, and I didn't actually watch it.
You certainly watched it.
Oh, that first. Yes, but of course, unfortunately, they've only got one single subject, which is themselves, and we've all lost interest.
Well, that reminds me of Dr. Johnson, who said, I've talked enough about me and about you, and therefore the conversation must end. Sadly, our conversation too must end. That's all from us. Up next, it's the great Professor Daniel Wooten. Dan, which of the princes is your favourite?
Oh, goodness me. Who do you think, Jacob? In fact, I was sitting there cheering on David Starkey, I have to say, and we are going to be continuing that conversation on the show tonight with Lady Colin Campbell and Phil Dampier, my royal masterminds, who have a lot of expert insight into this. Actually, we're also debating tonight Prince William versus Prince Harry in the clash. So our viewers will be able to vote for that. Plus, the latest from Mark Williams-Thomas from the Nicola Bulley inquest today, and Calvin Mackenzie on whether straight white men on television are becoming extinct. Let's hope not for your sake, Jacob.
Well, no, I hope one or two of us will be kept going. As always, that's going to be wonderful stuff, Dan. It's coming up after the weather. I'll be back tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation, and it's bound to be sunny in Somerset tomorrow.
Evening, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. After a bright start for some, it will turn fairly cloudy for most tomorrow. Outbreaks of rain at times across the north. Much of the south will stay dry thanks to this area of high pressure. But this low pressure system is toppling in over the top and will bring, as I say, much of the north a damp day tomorrow. We've seen some heavy showers around during this afternoon, but they're fading away through this evening. Most places becoming dry and clear and will stay that way for most of the night. But here comes that weather system increasing the cloud in the west and then bringing rain to Northern Ireland, southwest Scotland by dawn. Temperatures will stay at between 11 and 15 degrees for most, so a warmish night, not as humid as it was at the weekend, but a little warmer than it was last night. A damp start then for Northern Ireland. The rain may ease here a little later in the day, but for much of southern and western Scotland, it's a damp day. We'll see rain at times crossing into northern England, north and west Wales too. And eventually some of that patchy rain may trickle into the Midlands. But much of southern England, East Anglia will just stay dry, but with increasing amounts of cloud. The breeze will pick up as the rain arrives. Nothing especially heavy, but some heavier bursts are likely on the hills. Temperatures in the high teens across the north, further south the low 20s. But again, it'll turn quite humid as we go through the day. A lot of cloud, a lot of mist moving into these western areas too, making for a murky, humid night Tuesday night into Wednesday. The rain should ease, at least for a time, across parts of Scotland, staying fairly damp over the hills of northern England and North Wales. But many places will start Wednesday dry, but then another area of rain comes in, initially to Northern Ireland, but then spreading into parts of Scotland, northern England and Wales. And this could have some heavy bursts mixed in. Again, possibility of a rumble of thunder. To the northwest, it should turn drier, and further south and east, most places again looking dry and fine on Wednesday, but it will be predominantly cloudy and really quite humid once more. Goodbye.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.